Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, welcoming you all to another author interview on the show. Now, this is my second author interview with another talented writer and author who I met at last month's California Writers Club here in Orange County. Now, my guest has always been drawn to fantasy and sci-fi. He studied animation and digital art in college before working as a 3D artist on NCAA basketball, NHL hockey, and motocross games for PlayStation 2 and Xbox. Later, he transitioned to web development, becoming a lead software engineer. Now, eager to reconnect with the creative side, he is writing his debut urban fantasy novel. And besides writing his fantasy novel, he enjoys gaming, hiking, camping, and surfing. And he always seeks adventure on the page or in the real world. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, fellow author and fellow Californian, my good friend, Christian. Christian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gabriel. It's great to be here.
Awesome, Christian. So excited to have you on the show. So, before we dive into your urban fantasy, is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners? Any tidbits?
Any tidbits? Well, I've been working on the novel for about a year now. I'm very close to being about halfway through by my first estimation. Hope to wrap up the first draft by the end of summer and then on to revisions and redrafting, and hopefully we'll get it out in the public sometime next year.
Nice, very nice. Now, as a little teaser into your urban fantasy, I know you're still working on it, you don't want to spoil too much, but what can people expect? What's a little window we can expect in your urban fantasy novel?
So a lot of the purpose of the fantasy was based on my own struggles as a software engineer. So we all
Mm.
have things that we're trying to learn, things that seem out of grasp, things that other people seem to grasp better than we do. It's just around a character who happens to be a magical wizard bounty hunter who is helping her sister capture a monster. So hopefully it goes a little bit more closer to what people go through in life, just with a urban fantasy twist to it.
Nice. That actually sounds really, really good. And honestly, I don't get a chance to see a lot of urban fantasy pop up in, the publishing world or even in the indie author community. And the reason I say that, viewers and listeners, is that, fantasy is huge. There are so many different aspects of fantasy, from high epic fantasy, dark fantasy, thriller fantasy, suspense, etc. But urban fantasy I've always been very fascinated by, and how we're able to combine the modern with the mythologies and the mysticism of the past. But before we dive deeper into the creation of this story, let's talk a little bit more. You've had quite the career. You went to school in animation and you worked on several games for PlayStation and for Xbox. And then you transitioned to software engineer and been doing a whole bunch of stuff and have now gone back into your creative side. So I'm just curious, where did this initial love for the creative word come about? Was it through family and friends, or was it something that you discovered on your own?
It's kind of both. So growing up, I was an avid reader. I used to love reading fantasy, sci-fi, but it was mostly for my own personal entertainment, just a way to explore other worlds and to get into the minds of other authors and creators. I'm also a very visual person. So right out of college, I started working with game development, working with 3D animation, user design, and then that, kind of transitioned more into programming aspects of it. And while
Mm.
programming definitely has its own creative aspect to it, I definitely miss the creation of worlds and the creation of people and places and things like that. And a good friend of mine, Tori Eldridge, he and I go way back, and she he's been writing for a number of years, a different series, and it kind of gave me the spark to say, well, I have really nothing to lose. I can continue to work on this on the side when I can, and I just sat down one night, started working on it, and haven't stopped since.
Nice. So what would you consider your aha moment, that decision where it's like, you know what, I'm actually going to write out this story. I'm actually going to work on it and eventually publish it. Can you walk us through that decision?
Sure. It didn't really came to like a one moment. It was kind of those things where I wanted to do it, but I didn't have time. I really wanted to try it out, but I had other things I had to do. And then it just came to the point where I said, okay, this is the day where I'm just going to sit down and write the first chapter and see how it goes. And then after I wrote the first chapter, I rewrote the first chapter and changed it a little bit more. And then I said, you know, there might actually be something here. And then I wrote the second chapter, and then I wrote the third chapter, and then it just kind of got the momentum going for me to continue forth with writing.
Nice, very nice. So now that you talk about your writing in particular and how you approach writing, because I've always been fascinated about how authors approach their own writing process. So walk me through it. So you're now sitting at your desk with your computer, or maybe you're going old school with a pad and pencil, and you're jotting down the outline of your fantasy novel. Now, when you sat there, did you have any goals going into this book for yourself as the author, as well as keeping tabs on future promises to your prospective readers down the road?
hmm Well, I definitely wanted to approach this as a episodic series of books. So wherever one ends, it does offer a potential for another beginning. But if it just happens to be one book, then it will end in a very good way. So I knew how I wanted it to start. I knew how I wanted it to end. I had loose ideas of how the chapters would go. And then I just sat down and just started filling them in. Some
Mm.
chapters stayed the same, some chapters got completely obliterated and I did something different. But it was one of those things where I had an idea, I had an outline, but the outline was definitely written in pencil. I can erase it, do whatever I need to do, but the ending was still going to be the final goal for the series or for the book.
Nice. Now, a little fun question. Would you consider yourself a planner or a plotter when it comes to your stories?
That's a good question. I thought I was a planner until I started to write. So I got the blueprint out, I got the layout, I knew where people were going to go, the part of the book where they were going to grow, where they were going to face confrontation. And then when I started filling it in, other things started to grow from that. And I realized, oh, there's a character that might fit good in here. And then a whole chapter changed because of that character. So I would probably say I'm right there smack in the middle.
Absolutely. And for viewers who don't know what I mean by planner versus plotter, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen, because I always get these mixed up. So one aspect of being an author is that, we like to sometimes have outlines to keep a track of everything so we know, okay, this is how the story is going to go. But needless to say, sometimes plans go awry and sometimes new things emerge. And sometimes those new things change each story drastically. And as a
Mhm.
result, we began planning new things out of the blue and just began writing. So we start with an idea and we just run with it. We don't stick with an outline. And what has sort of been like the challenges of that, Christian, in your opinion?
So plotting is really good to get you to where you want to go as a story, in my opinion. It
Hmm.
gives you the idea of, okay, what's this story about? What's the character? What are they trying to overcome? And what would be the outcome? But personalities, places, people they meet along the way, circumstances that change them from going one path to the other, that was surprisingly that was a surprise for me because it would change almost on the fly. I would sit there, I would write a scene, and then something would poke me in the back of the brain and say, try this, see how this turns out. And sometimes it didn't go anywhere and I went right back to what I was originally planning, but sometimes it went a completely different direction that was more exciting than I originally planned.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Yeah, for me, I've always viewed myself as, outline. I love having just an outline to go by. That's not to say that things don't pop up. There has been quite a few times where a chapter has completely changed, or in some cases, for my future books, one in particular, which is set in medieval Japan, I've written, almost 20 chapters, but going back to my outline, all those details are in like the first maybe 5 chapters because I write very, very extensive outlines. And, it all comes with, experience and, figuring out, how I like to write, what I want to write, and so forth. And it's also very interesting to hear how other people view one's writing. So now I turn that over to you, Christian. So, what has been the response been from family and friends who have learned that you have begun this new journey, writing this new book, your first book?
At the beginning, I wanted to keep it a secret. It was it was one of those things I was afraid that if it didn't work out, that a lot of people would expect something of me and it just didn't go anywhere. But as I started to write and it started to get legs, I had my oldest daughter, who's 17 and
Mm.
a tremendous author in her own right, just read and see if this was something that she would find interesting. And she sat there for probably 100 pages, the first 100 pages I wrote, made notes, looked at it, and said, I think there's something in here. And so then I reached out to a few other friends of mine and said, I hate to be that guy, but would you mind reading something that I've been working on for a little while? And the feedback has been tremendous. And I told him right up at the very beginning, I don't want you to just blow sunshine my way. I want you to say, okay, what works, what doesn't work, because at the end, I want this to be good. I don't want this to be something that makes me feel good because you think it's good. So they were very good about giving me good positive feedback, made a few corrections. And now that I'm fully into writing pretty much every day, I'm going to wait to see towards the end how they feel about it. So there's no more kind of delays and just trying to get the story out.
Absolutely. Now, are you considering doing any beta readers and arc readers when you get to the final stages of the writing?
I am. It's one of those things I've run into with art, with even programming. If you're in the weeds for so long, you don't see things other people see.
Mm.
So having a group of beta readers read it would actually be very positive for me because they'll catch things like, well, you said this in this chapter, but in this chapter you said something else. And seeing it for so long, probably be something I would just overlook. So definitely.
Absolutely. And from the initial reactions and responses you've gotten from friends and family who have read the stages of the book where it is now, would you feel that your initial goals and promises have been validated thus far?
I would say so. If anything else, it's given me the encouragement to plow forward.
Mm.
Even though some of the people who read it said, yeah, it's not my cup of tea. It's not the genre I like, but I really like the characters inside of it. I like to see where this is going for their growth and what they decide to do with it. So that gave me the encouragement I needed to push forward and get this story that I've wanted to tell for a while to get it out into the world.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads into another question, which I always love asking my guests, which is the first of many reflective questions, which is, whenever we work on a project, that's our first, it is our baby because we put a lot of time and effort into these projects, and a little bit of ourselves is imprinted into the work. People can always find some aspect of our identity in our work, whether that's art, music, writing, or some form of creative outlet. And as a result, especially now in the digital age, it's both a blessing as well as a curse. And what I mean by that is, on one side, when it comes to social media, we're able to reach a wide audience of people and connect with others and build this good rapport and network, which is huge and something that we'll be talking about much later in the interview. But on the other side of the coin, because of social media, we do leave ourselves exposed and unfortunately allow ourselves to be um, assaulted in a way where people can write negative comments, spam, hate speech, trolls, so forth. And that can be very detrimental to an author's mental health and their well being and make them reconsider, am I actually spending my time right? And of course, imposter syndrome is always going to be in the back of every creative's mind, whether that's artistry, whether that's music, whether that's writing a book, or even if you are a program developer, there's always going to be some form of imposter syndrome every now and then. So I'm curious, Christian, throughout the writing process for you, have you ever had those moments of imposter syndrome or heightened anxiety? And if so, or if not, what has disciplined you to continue going forward with this book of yours?
That's a very good question. I think you hit the nail on the head with the imposter syndrome. Working in games, working as a programmer, working in any creative field, working in any scientific field, I have encountered imposter syndrome every step of the way.
Mm,
And the feedback that I've given to others who face the same thing is that the voices inside your head tends to lie a lot.
yes.
And recognizing when the lies are being told in your head and what you believe to be true is a daily battle sometimes. And what has gotten me through is the belief that this story needs to be told. It needs to get out. If it doesn't get published, I'll keep trying until it does. If it gets published and nobody reads it, then I did what I was set out to do. It was something
Mm,
that I told myself the world, for some reason, needs to see this story. Now, it's not going to be, anything by Stephen King or anybody else. It's my very first book. It is probably not going to be as polished as other people's first novels, but I'm going to give it a try anyway. I'm going to see what I can do. And if it turns out to be nothing, then I'll try a second one and we'll see how it goes.
absolutely, 100%. And that kind of leads now to the discussion that I've always had with my guests on the show of whether or not this kind of fun debate of the rise of creativity now in the 2020s and how it's increased. And this sort of came about from a previous guest of mine who was on the show, Jasmine Young, who posted not too long ago that, in her opinion, a golden age emerged during the COVID years, those 4 years of lockdown and isolation. And I've always asked my guests whether or not they agree with this. Some have argued that yes, a golden age did emerge from those 4 years in lockdown, while others argue that a golden age was already on the rise, but quarantine and lockdown just sped up the process even more. So, Christian, what are your thoughts on this debate, and where do you find yourself on the spectrum?
I think it was probably already starting, but COVID really made people sit down and really focus on it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. So when MP3s came out, people, would stop buying CDs who before would stop buying records so they can get their music. And now you can get music almost anywhere. It's
Yeah.
easy. You just pop it in and you start listening to it. But there's been a rise of people going to concerts, going to live music, going to places where they interact with other people listening to live music. And I think it's because they may not know it, but there's a disconnect between the social aspect of art and just the commercialization of art.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go and to a concert to listen to your favorite band play, it is a much different experience than if you're listening to in the car on your MP3 player or through Spotify or whatever. And I think now that, art with AIs being generated, and it's so
Yeah.
easy for them to do all this kind of things. I still think there's the human element that people are going to be craving, and it's going to force them to go into places where people are working on art together. People are getting together to talk about art, music, literature. So I think where people think doom and gloom for all these technologies just taking art and just giving it to robots, I think the part of us that's going to really push back is the human aspect of it. So I think this is just maybe the beginning of seeing us kind of push back with this kind of renaissance.
Absolutely. And that's actually a very interesting viewpoint that you brought up, Christian, about, AI when it comes to art. Because, yes, AI is able to make artwork more accessible and distributes it to a wide group of people. But you are absolutely right. AI art definitely does lack the human aspect, the creative um, touch, in the sense of, yes, you can ask a program, it's like, oh, what does this mean? And the program's going to go through its algorithm to come up with a response that it feels is appropriate. Whereas if you ask an artist the exact same question, they're going to give you something that's very personal, something that you can relate to. And especially now for authors who are fighting back against AI, which I wholeheartedly approve when it comes to, artists trying to preserve their work, authors trying to maintain their integrity of their stories. When people are using AI to write books, it's very, very detrimental. Now, I'll be the first to say that I have used AI, but I've only ever used it in the sense of, let's say, for concept art for characters in books, never the final product, as well as AI for not necessarily for writing my book. No, I absolutely have to write my own book, but I have used it in a way to help generate characters, plot, something that I can use to build upon. So I'll be the first to admit that. But definitely you can tell there's a difference when something is entirely made from AI and then one that's entirely made from the individual. And that kind of leads now into the next discussion, the business side of being an author, which I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on, Christian. So I know you're still working on your novel. You're still in the final stages of the writing before you go into editing and eventually publishing. But I am curious, in your journey right now, have you begun researching the avenues to publish hybrid, traditional, and indie? And can you tell us if you have decided on which of the three to go?
Mhm. So I have started looking into the traditional publishing route,
Mm.
just to see what's involved with that. Of course, everything has its pluses and minuses. It is selling yourself. You have to sell yourself, not your book, but as you, the author. What are you about? What kind of stories do you write? And if it connects with a publisher and they want to take it on, then they may only want one book. They may only want a couple books. You may have to write a couple books a year just to fulfill a contract. The other side to that is self-publishing, where you are just print out your own digital version, put it on Amazon, and you're responsible for your advertising. You're responsible for
Hmm.
getting the word out that way. You're also making sure that people are hungry and you can write more books that way. So I haven't dismissed the self-publication route yet, but it'll probably be something I might consider if after my other avenues are exhausted and it's not quite there yet. Another thing too is that if you go with a traditional route, you may need to write a few books to show them. So if I
Yes.
write one that's in a series, I might need to write two more just to say, here's three of my books. What do you think? I can continue to write if it works for you. And if not, then, keep on shopping. So I think at the very least, a couple books completed will do a lot better for you trying to publish either in the traditional or self-publishing route.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's actually what a lot of my other colleagues have said on the show, that if you do go the route of traditional publishing, it's always good to have a few stories already on the verge of being edited and published. But I will say that I've also had a lot of authors on the show talk about gatekeeping in the traditional publishing world. Now, in your research, have you come across that term, gatekeeping, and its connection to publishing?
I have heard of it. I don't know it too well.
Okay. Well, for viewers and listeners who are just learning about this term, in my research, gatekeeping refers to these major publishing houses only allowing certain books from certain authors into their sphere. And yes, I do understand that it is a business and they do have a standard. But from the authors that I have interviewed, they talked about how it is becoming incredibly difficult to go traditional publishing because, 20 years ago, that was the main form, that was the standard. And now a majority of authors nowadays are going independent or hybrid. Yes, traditional publishing is still dominating, but hybrid and indie are right behind them. And while I can, as I said, understand the idea of only allowing certain books that are marketable, that could generate interest as well as get a return back from the companies that they're published under, there should be, what's the word? Avenues for authors to submit their work because it's not easy finding a agent. It's very costly, especially if it's your first book. And that's why I've always said on the show that if you do go the direction of traditional publishing, look at small publishing houses. They're just as reputable as the major ones like Macmillan, HarperCollins, Penguin Random House, Tor, Forge, whatever. Don't ever discount these small houses because I'll tell you this, I've met a lot of authors on this show that have published through small traditional publishing houses and they have had great success. Would you share the same sentiments, Christian? What are your thoughts on this?
I would absolutely agree. Using it as a metaphor, when I first started as a web designer, you have your Amazon, your Googles, your Microsofts. I started
Yes.
at a very small company, probably about 7 people, and I was one of 2 web designers.
Mm,
And I've learned so much in that job, just as a designer, as a developer, just having a job. And that gave me the stepping stone to go bigger and bigger. So I think you're right on with that.
nice. And now let's actually turn to another aspect of the business in the publishing world, understanding one's audience, which is very, very interesting and sometimes one of the major hit or misses in the publishing world. Because as Christian and I will tell you, when we write our books, we are the target audience first and foremost, the author, because we know the story better than anyone else. But when we write for an audience in mind, we really have to consider, okay, where does this book actually fall under? What's the genre? What are the subgenres? And who exactly are going to be interested in this book? So, Christian, this is a two-part question. The first part is for you, do you have a good idea of who your audience is right now? And secondly, in your opinion, when should an author consider their audience or at least have a good idea of their audience? The drafting phase when they're still in the writing aspect or in the marketing phase when their book is published and they're now going to build their brand?
Good question. So my story is catered more for the young adult genre.
Mm,
So those who are teenagers, young adults. Just the humor, the amount of I don't want to say violence, but the amount of things that happen to people.
mm,
While it's not graphic and horrific like some of the other novels out there, it's definitely has some mature themes to it. So young adult is the target that I've always entitled or I've always envisioned when I started working on it. And having 2 daughters in that age group will help me keep in my lane, so to speak. For the second part of your question, I think pretty much from the beginning, once you have a concept for a story, you should start to think about how it would cater to a certain demographic.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, you can't have everybody love your books. It's one of those things where if it does happen, it's very rare. But there are some things that people like about certain stories, and some people are drawn to other aspects of stories. So when I was writing mine, I was thinking, well, this could be young adult, or it could be maybe a little more mature, depending on how far I want to go. But then I realized that uh, I think that, well, there's two ways to think about it. You can think about it from your own story. What are you trying to tell? Are you trying to
Right.
tell a very mature story? Or are you trying to tell a story that people who are struggling to learn, grow, understand would really relate to? And I've realized that, the teenage years, young adult, that's probably where this is going to um, resonate the best. That's not to say while you're writing a story, you're like, you know what, let's see if we can make this go a different direction. And then it becomes, maybe a horror story where it
Mm.
originally was going to be something different. That would be a good time to say, okay, well, maybe this is going to be a mature only type of story, and this is what I'm going to focus on. But if you're thinking about doing this as a business, you definitely have to think about who are going to be the people that would buy it. Um, you can just write it for yourself if it's a very specific niche, but I think that the sooner you understand what your audience is and who they are, not only will it be better for when you're ready to sell, but it's also going to be better for trying to understand how far you're willing to stretch the story.
Absolutely. And that leads into the follow-up question, which is the readership, which, in my opinion, is probably the most difficult group to market to. Yes, we do have the audience in mind, which is like the main genre of where your book falls under. But the readership, those individual people who are going to pick up your book, that's the difficult part. And the readership, as I've learned, there are four categories: middle grade, YA, NA for new adult, and AF for adult fiction. And each readership has its own set of sort of hidden rules, in the sense that, okay, if you're writing for middle grade, these are what are allowed, this is what is forbidden, prohibited. Same thing with YA, NA, and of course AF, which is more adult fiction. Now, Christian, as you said, your story is going to be more so YA, because not only is that the audience you're marketing towards, but because you have children who fit in that age bracket, you have an idea of like, okay, these are the kind of stories that they're reading, so I want to make sure that my story caters to them. Now, in your opinion, what has been the challenging aspects of writing for YA, especially when most YA stories kind of border between new adult and adult fiction in terms of its content and themes?
So it's been a while since I've been a teenager. um, and life tends to um, stay the same, but you tend to change. So my vision of what it was like at that age is getting further and further away. So
Mm,
that has definitely been a challenge. But with my two daughters at that age, they're the ones who are going to rein me in and say, okay, this is probably not what you want to do. You probably want to think about more like this. And for my oldest daughter, she's really good at that. She's, right at the cusp of graduating from high school. So she's the audience that I would get the best feedback for that age group.
nice. And this kind of leads into another discussion, which I've always loved asking my guests, which is this balancing act between an author's identity in terms of how they approach storytelling, while also staying true to the source material, this scale. Because a lot of authors on the show have said that it's a very delicate balance, because each story or each genre has its own particular style. In the case of epic fantasy, anyone who has ever read an epic fantasy story knows it's going to go a certain beat. And we don't want to write like J.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, George R. R. Martin. We want to show our individuality. while again still staying true to, okay, it is still epic fantasy. I can kind of get what's happening. There are familiar aspects or themes. We don't want to change it too much, because a lot have stated, and I agree, that if you subvert the genre too much, the reader is definitely going to lose interest, because it's no longer an epic fantasy story or a sci-fi romance or a thriller noir. It's a very delicate balance, this tightrope of your individuality as an author, but also showing respect to the books before and the genre that you're writing in. So, Christian, for you, how have you been able to deal with this balance for your urban fantasy book?
It's challenging, especially when you start to write different parts of your life. You might be in a great mood, you might be in a bad mood, you might have
Mm,
seen a movie that you really liked and how the dialogue was snappy and quick, and you might have read a book where it was a little bit slower and things were just going at a snail's pace. So for me, it usually comes into like clumps. So I will write for a while, maybe I'll write 4 pages or 4 chapters. I'll go back and reread just to see how the tone is compared to was before. And sometimes I'll start to get a little more playful, and I'll realize, no, let's bring it back to the way it was. Sometimes it is just a bummer and
mm.
nothing is happening. And I've actually taken parts of chapters and just thrown them away. I'm just like, this is not working. This is not going anywhere. I don't think the final tone for the story will be done until the first draft is done, just to know how the pacing is going to go. I do have an idea. I do think it's going to be a little more downtrodden, but with a few upbeat quips. But the tone of the story is going to be really difficult to keep consistent through. So I think once that first draft is done, I let it marinate a while. I'll go back and reread it, question who wrote this in the first place, and then try to chisel away at the pieces that don't seem to fit.
All right. As a little fun question, would you like to share with our viewers and listeners some of the stories or authors that may have played a role in either the development of the story, your approach to characters, some of the themes that will come about, stuff like that?
Absolutely. So a lot of the inspiration for this was based on shows and books that I liked when I was growing up. So this is going to age me a little bit, but Supernatural, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, The
Mhm.
Dresden Files, uh, put those in a blender and you start to get an idea of what this story is going to be kind of like. It's going to be about fighting monsters. It's going to be about supernatural elements. It's going to be magic, but the core of it is about somebody trying to learn something that they're just not good at and questioning themselves, trying again, failing again, trying harder, failing harder. It's not going to be a smooth journey for this person.
Nice. That actually sounds like a really, really amazing book, and I can't wait to read it when it comes out. And this then leads to probably one of my favorite questions to ask my guests. So brace yourself, Christian. This is a very loaded question. So I've been doing this show now for about 7 years and have interviewed a wide range of authors from hybrid, traditional, indie, from many stages of life. Some are former teachers, some are professors, some are students, some are established writers, some are just writers writing for fun, and so forth. And I've learned so much from these incredible people. And from what I've learned, I've come to the realization that there's sort of two roads for authors: to be an author and to be known as an author. And for me, to be an author is an individual dedicated to the art of storytelling, not motivated by capital. But let's be honest, it's nice to get a little bit of money here and there. Whereas to be known as an author is an individual dedicated to marketing, going on shows like these, promoting their work and establishing their brand. And I also realized that in this industry, there is no guarantee your book's going to be an overnight success. I hate to burst anyone's bubble, but it is true. This is not a get rich quick money scheme. This is not an industry where you can quit your day job and write to your heart's content. Would we all like it to be? Absolutely, but that's not the case. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, of course. There are many authors who have written their first novel or first series and that launched their careers, and all the power to them. That's not an easy thing to do. But generally speaking, your first book or your first anything is not going to be the start of your career, at least not where you imagine it. You have to keep your goals realistic. And if you do, your ultimate goal, which is either to be a world renowned author or a literacy acclaimed novelist, it will happen, but it will take time. So, Christian, what are your thoughts on this discussion that yes, there is no guarantee your first book is going to be the start of your legacy in the publishing world, but that shouldn't stop you honing your craft as an author?
Absolutely. I can place this to almost any endeavor I put out in my life. The first time you do it, it's either going to be painfully bad or it's going to be painfully good enough. And what I mean by painfully good enough is that it will appear that you've got it figured out. 6 months later, you look back on it and you're going to wonder, who was the person who wrote this? This is terrible.
Mhm.
There's going to be stages in your life where you're going to be working towards something. And if it's something that matters to you, you will continue to work and work and work despite what happens. If it's going to be rejected, if it's going to be laughed at, if it's going to be tossed to the side. I'm also a very practical person. So I do have a full-time job. I'm a software engineer,
Mm.
but the drive to get this story out into the world is what makes me work an extra hour or two a night just to get it done.
Mhm.
Um, I have a word count that I try to meet. I try to meet, I think, 2,000 words a week. I have it written on my whiteboard above my desk. And if I'm starting to get to Friday and I haven't opened up my laptop, then that night I'm going to be writing 1,000 words. So set a goal, put it in a place where you're looking at it. And every time you look at it, just remind yourself, this is what you want to do. Keep working at it. You don't have to quit your job and starve and, work on your novel. There are other ways to do it. You're going to be tired a lot more, but there are ways to do it.
Absolutely. And one of the best things about being authors is that, among the many things, is that grit transforms into talent. We only get better as time goes on because it may be your 10th, 15th, or 20th book that really gets your name out there. And that is fine because then you can say, you've enjoyed this book, check out 19 all the way down to my first novel all those years ago and see my growth as an author. Because I will
Mhm.
definitely tell you, and probably you agree, Christian, that the books we read, that we have read growing up, they're probably not the same as they were in their initial conception, their initial version. They had to go through a series of changes and edits, second editions, third editions, how many editions? Because as authors, we are constantly changing and constantly adding. And also, to add to that, another amazing benefit of being an author is also meeting others and networking to build great rapport. And, for authors, that is huge because it's from those groups of people that we can establish our own teams, whether that's a good group of beta readers, a person who's a talented editor, as well as a person who may also double as an artist. So, Christian, are there any people you want to give a personal shout out to and a thank you who have helped you along the way?
Yeah, so many people in so many different ways. Just the encouragement for my family to recognize that their dad is a little crazy, but that's okay. He's the one who's always chasing a dream in one form or another. To my friends who give me the encouragement to understand that this is something that I have to do, and that the other mentors along the way to show that it can actually be done. It's harder than it seems, but it's also more rewarding than you would think. So just to all those people out there, thank you for supporting me, helping me along, and helping me on my author journey.
Awesome. And as a final question to cap off this amazing author interview, with everything you've learned thus far, Christian, in your time as an animator for the games you've worked on, working in software, and now being an author and on the road to publishing your very first novel. What is your word of wisdom to the viewers watching and or listening to this interview right now?
I think that you will always run into obstacles on your path to where you want to go. And if you're going to fall forward. Keep going forward. It's going to be hard. It's not going to be impossible. So just keep going.
Absolutely 100%. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude another amazing author interview here on the show. I want to give a huge thank you to my friend Christian Halsell for making his official debut here on the channel. We wish him the very best on his journey to publishing his book. Hopefully sometime this year. I would very much love to read it and add it to my collection. Now, Christian, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect?
You can find me on Instagram, Christian Halsell. I'm also on Facebook, Christian R. Halsell. And yeah, not too many beyond those, but those are the best places to find me.
Awesome. I will link all those down below in the description of this video. And one final thing, if you'd also like to meet myself and Christian in person. I don't know, Christian, if you are going to be attending this week, but this Saturday is the monthly California Writers Club meetup, which I'll provide the link down below of where we will be meeting. If you want to meet a bunch of California-based authors, which range from poets, screenwriters, novelists, anyone in the publishing industry, whether established or just starting off, that is where we'll be. So if you want to see us, make sure to check us out on that date at that time. And as always, viewers and listeners, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill wishing you all a wonderful day and asking you to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And until next time, have a wonderful day.